This is a hearing on the serious problem the country now faces of the consequences of people having been given loans, having taken loans, a mutual process, which many of them have been unable to comply with. And we have a serious problem in the country. The issue of subprime/predatory lending has several facets. It makes sense from the standpoint of the Congress to deal with it in two essential ways. One is the question of what legislation is appropriate going forward. And I know there are people who sometimes accuse us of hindsight and say, well, now you're involved. The ranking minority member sitting next to me and I, the gentleman from North Carolina who's here, our other colleague from North Carolina, 2 years ago began to work on this issue. And I will say that it was not a case of hindsight with us. We tried very hard to come to some agreement. Other forces intervened, but I think if we had been able to work freely, we would have had a bill 2 years ago that frankly might have diminished some of this damage. And I think we are determined in a way to work together. That's on legislation going forward. Legislation going forward will not help the current group of people who are entrapped in this. Now, one of the arguments has been, well, people make their own judgments, and what are you getting involved? The fact is, these kinds of loans are not randomly geographically distributed. There is an element of concentration in them, which means that the victims, when some of these loans go bad, are not just the individuals, but the neighborhoods and cities in which these individuals live. Blight can be increased, and it is therefore a legitimate public policy problem. It also, of course, has, as we are seeing, potential macroeconomic consequences. So today's hearing will be to look into what can be done with regard to people who are already in this situation. And I want to say, members will note that our colleague, the gentleman from Ohio, was with us. She is someone, an alumna of this committee who moved on to be a housing advocate in the Appropriations Committee, and she representing the state of Ohio, as both of our member witnesses do, and as our colleague, Mr. Wilson, does. Ohio has been a state that's been particularly hit by this, and it helps underline the point that these are not random geographically. But in the state of Ohio, what we have is an example of why these are a problem, not just for individuals, but for neighborhoods and communities in a lot of ways. And the gentleman from Ohio was, let me say politely, insistent that we look into this. And so what we have today is the first half of this, and that is looking at what we can do to alleviate the plight of the people who are already in this situation. Now, let me put one thing to rest. We are certainly well aware of the restrictions against retroactivity. Where rights have vested, we are not interested in trying to jeopardize them. On the other hand, we do think that all manner of people in this situation have a vested interest in working together going forward. We are going to be joined here today by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Let me say, by the way, to the extent that loans that were made are held in the portfolios of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it seems to me we have some options that we wouldn't have if they were securitized. So for those who think that the always best thing to do is to reduce the portfolio of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and to require them to securitize everything, I think today is a counter-indication of that. And to the extent that we are able to provide some help to some people, the fact that we have some portfolio situation here is important. And to the extent that we can get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to help in this situation, my guess is we're going to be looking at things that they will be holding in their portfolios. And the notion that the portfolios are this bad thing may be somewhat undercut by their usefulness in this situation. We have the FHA with us, and one of the things that we think both currently and going forward is that the FHA has a great potential to be more useful in this, both in terms of helping out and going forward. And we appreciate the cooperation we've gotten from the Commissioner of the FHA. And I also want to express my appreciation for the bank regulators who have shown a great deal of supportive interest here. So this hearing is going to focus on what we can do to help the people who have already been in difficulty. We will then be moving on later to talk about legislation. With that, I will now recognize the ranking member, and I think we have both exercised our options under our rules, so that there'll be 20 minutes on each side of opening statements. And I recognize the gentleman from Alabama.